join at the stage. Elohe Amani, Shagini Tahar.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you're as excited as I am about our panel discussion. I'm honored to introduce our guest speakers today. We will talk about empowerment through literature, activism, and technology. Don't you just love that topic, the cross-section of all these very important elements in our life? Just to remind you, at the end, after our dear speakers have talked, we will have a Q&A session. So I would suggest you make note of your questions and also your comments. Karen and John always wanted to make sure that you also know that you can comment about the subjects, not just questions, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our first speaker, which I think most, if not all of you know very well, Elohe Amani. Elohe is a gender, peace, and human rights activist. She has been a member of the California State University for the past 31 years as an administrator of student and academic technology services, as a lecturer in the Women's Studies program, and as the Deputy Director of Title IX. As you know, Title IX assures that there is no bias based on sex or education. It's a very important one. Elohe has followed the global women's movement since 1985, where she joined the 3rd UN Women Conference in Nairobi, Kenya. She attended and has presented papers at the conferences as the post-Beijing conference in Cuba and all the sessions of Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, since 1995 in New York. She also presented at the UN Human Rights Council's 20th session briefing on stoning in 2003 as a Women's Intercultural Network, WIN board member. She went to Afghanistan and as a trained mediator played a pivotal role in bringing the majority of women NGOs in Kabul so that to the same table for coalition building and collaboration. Elohe is a well-known writer, both in English and Persian, on issues related to women and human rights. Her articles are published in various places. If you go to our website, Voices for Women for Change.info, I really suggest all the journals are hyperlinked to her articles, and I really highly recommend you go check it out and read those articles if you haven't already. Elohe has been working with mediators beyond borders, and faculty of International Training Institute and cross-cultural specialist of Mediators Without Borders, and had the honor of being the chair of the inaugural Training Institute of MBB, which is Mediators Beyond Borders, Women in Mediation. For women leaders in Middle East that they met in Turkey, I believe. Most recently, in the March of this year, she was the keynote speaker of the U.S. Women Caucus at UN, at the U.S. Women Caucus in UN. Currently, she is the chair of Global Choices for WIN and one of the founders of Iranian Circle of WIN, which is acronym is ICWIN. We're so glad that she's joining us today. Thank you, Elohe. Next, we are honored to have Sahar Devijani. Sahar was born in the Evin prison in Tehran, Iran in 1983. And she migrated to California in 1996, where she graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in comparative literature in 2006. She moved to Turin, Italy, where she lived and over 10 years and wrote her debut novel, Children of the Jacandra Tree, بچه‌های درخت جاکاندرا, which has been very successful and has been translated in 30 languages, including Farsi. I have to say I read it in Farsi and the translation is great too. It's a great word. And it's been published in more than 75 countries. This book has been winning awards and being selected for various awards all over the world. It was a Women's National Book Association Great Group Selection. It was France's Le Livre de Poche Prix de Lecture à Sélection. And it was a finalist for Italy's El Gran Premio. I don't know if I said that right, but twice a pushcard nominee. Devijani's writings have appeared in BBC Persian, the Bellevue Review, DW Persian, Corriere della Sera, La Nazione, Read It Forward, Slice Magazine, many of these. We're happy that she's currently living in Berkeley, California, and she's joining us today. Thank you. Next, we are honored to have Shadi Sharifi. Shadi is an Iranian lawyer specializing in family law. As a family law lawyer, she has worked on many domestic abuse cases and has helped women free themselves from violence and abuse in the hands of their husbands. She's a human rights activist who participates in many human rights-based projects for Iran, like No to Hijab, No to Execution campaigns, and analysis and critique of the Constitution of Iran. She's an innovator and project manager for Toranj. Sorry, that came out really loud. Toranj, which is an Android application that supports those at risk of experiencing violent circumstances. Isn't that a great idea? Don't we need those apps? It's really wonderful. Unfortunately, as you know, domestic violence is prevalent in Iran and can be described as an epidemic or a crisis. Research from 2001 to 2003 showed that 66% of married women in Iran were subjected to at least one kind of abuse at least once in their lifetime. Iranian women commonly experience domestic abuse in silence, and few report these to law enforcement. It happens here too, but of course, unfortunately, it's much worse back in Iran. Because of these appalling statistics, Shadi has inspired to create Toranj, which is a domestic violence app. Toranj is an Android application that educates and supports those at risk of experiencing violence inside or outside their home. Toranj offers such services through self-assessment of, for emergency calls first, and legal support handbooks, educational resources, self-assessment of romantic relationships, and a database of pro bono counseling clinics and law firms. So important for this. As of today, it has been downloaded 50,000 times by 50,000 users. Now it's 60,000. That's great. Big applause to Random for creating such a great application. So, before we just start, just a couple of ground rules. I'm sorry to say, but I will pass on 5-minute, 2-minute warnings to our guests. And again, please remember to keep note of your questions and comments, and we'll have a long session at the end to have all that discussion. Thank you. Elijah, please go ahead.
Salam و درود. Thank you very much for inviting us here. salam wa durud, and thank you for the invitation. It's my honor to be here, particularly being part of this younger woman panel. The topic of my talk is the war of political rights and religious fundamentalism on women's rights. So, as an educator, I like to start with definition and how we refer to these terms. Algerian sociologist and women's human rights defender Marie-Elie Lucas defined fundamentalism as, quote, political movements of the extreme right, and I want to underscore political movements of the extreme right, which in a context of globalization manipulate religion, culture, or ethnicity in order to achieve their political aim. Fundamentalism have emerged out of all the world's major religious traditions, including Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism, and others. Fundamentalists across all these categories abuse the rights of women. They define and redefine the role of women at home and in society. Even the religious claims of their proponent, religious fundamentalism, are especially difficult and dangerous to contest. They represent a minority phenomenon distinct from the broader religious tradition, its religious tradition itself, through drawing selectively from them. No religion is inherently fundamentalist, nor should fundamentalist views be imputed to all adherents of any religion. The term for far right, political right, or extreme right describe the broad range of political groups and ideologies usually taken to be further to the right of the mainstream center-right on the traditional left-right spectrum. Far-right politics commonly involve support of social inequality and social hierarchy, elements of social conservatism, and opposition to most forms of liberalism and socialism. Both terms are also used to describe Nazi and fascist movements and other groups who hold extreme nationalist, chauvinistic, xenophobic, racist, or reactionary views. The most extreme right-wing movements have pursued oppression and genocide against groups of people on the basis of their alleged inferiority. So now that I define these terms, I want to see what are the global contexts that we're using these terms and what are the global patterns about the rise of religious extremism and the far-right neo-fascism movement. The rise of religious fundamentalism and the far-right poses a serious risk to global gender equality. Karim Benon, special rapporteur in the field of women's rights, presented a report on 25th of October in 2017 to UN General Assembly. Quote, I'm here to talk about the world your daughters will inherit and some of the most urgent threats their human rights will face in coming years. And she continues that her report is focused on the impact of diverse forms of fundamentalism and extremism. And I underscore the diverse forms of fundamentalism and extremism across all religion on the rights of women. Fundamentalist extremist ideologies and the movement and governments that embraces them seek to roll back advances achieved in securing women's equality, aim to block further advances, and try to penalize and stigmatize women's human rights defenders promoting such critical efforts. Dear friends, women's human rights and women are facing an alarming backlash in many parts of the world, and including in Iran, in our country. We need more than ever to protect the fundamental principle that all rights rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Despite this unbreakable principle, we are witnessing efforts by fundamentalist groups to undermine the foundation on which the whole human rights system is based. So what these two movements, these two global movements that they are on rise have in common? Far-right extremists, both political and religious, have a lot in common and share similarities that it's not surprising. They both consuming hatred. Many white supremacists and Islamist extremists tend to inhabit a narrow-based world dominated by an all-consuming hatred and a total intolerance of anyone's view but their own. So they have this binary thinking, black and white, you're either with me or against me. While religious extremists with their narrow-based intolerance perpetuate violence on those who don't share their views, far-right political extremists see as enemies all those who in their eyes have helped enable changes that they dislike, such as following inward migration from Asia, particularly South and West Asia. I kind of don't like to use the terminology of Middle East because it's a colonial-centric term, because what we call Middle East was the Middle East of England when England was the center of the world. So I refer to it as West Asia. It has at least a geographical merit to it. And North African. In 2011, the Norwegian extremists who carried out the murderous attack in Oslo, not on Muslims or immigrants, but on youth members of a party he blamed for changing the racial mix of Norway. Also, white supremacists rail against a multicultural society and women's autonomy and liberation, and obviously, so religious extremists share the same views. Both far-right extremists and religious extremists see themselves as righteousness purists, yet they want very different societies. What they do share in common is an often obsessive interest in extremely graphic imaginary online, much of it encrypted, but some of it circulated more widely for recruitment purposes. The other aspect that they have in common, and I presented a paper specifically on this topic at the Women Conference, Iranian Women Conference in Germany this last January, and that was a whole paper on this subject, that both the religious extremists in all religion and the far-right movement, neo-fascist movement, which is on rise, they both kind of divide women's movement, and they have impact on creating tension and division in women's movement. So the war of far-right and religious extremism on women's rights. The far-right is on rise across the globe, and the gain made by women since 1960s are in their sight. The leader of the world's most powerful nation is a proud misogynist, take pride about sexual harassment of women, and has declared himself intent on abolishing abortion rights across the United States. He ran on a right-wing populist platform, and his presidency has emboldened far-right and anti-abortion, anti-women's human rights movement globally. The far-right governments of Fidesz in Hungary and the League in Italy are pushing the most conservative vision of the family, with propaganda machine urging women to have more babies. In Brazil, newly elected president has demonstrated his approach to women's rights by closing the Department of Human Rights and creating the Department of Family Values, headed up by Damaras Alves, who has said, quote, "We want a Brazil without abortion." In Poland, the far-right Law and Justice Party has backed increased restriction onto abortion rights already limited by some of the most prohibitive laws in Europe. So I'm going to go over this quickly because I want to show, and hopefully this will publish in future, but showing that the rise of the far right is not only in the United States, in all Europe and for Latin America, we are witnessing the rise of this movement, and the goal of all these far rights movement, they have some similarities, and one of them is to take away the rights of women. Because I don't want to, I cut through those, but the appearance of gender equality can be examined in the role of female politicians among right-wing populist parties. In Germany, for example, the AfD, 92 seats strong parliamentary group includes just 10 women. So although in words they claim they use the language of feminism, this far rights movement, and they use the vocabulary that women's rights advocates use, but in practice, that's not the essence of their action. Many right-wing populist parties do, however, have prominent female figures among their leadership, such as AfD in Germany, France National Rally, President Marine Le Pen, and Poland former Prime Minister. So these women are there to give these parties an open, modern guise and to appeal to female voters. They are not progressive parties. There are no real gender equality. It's not accidental that for the first time in US, as of January 1st, 2019, the CEOs of the 4 of nation's 5 biggest defense contractors, Northrop, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and defense arm of Boeing, are no women. It's not accidental. And across the negotiating table, the Pentagon top weapon buyers and the chief overseer of the nation's nuclear stockpile now join other women in some of the most influential national security posts, such as the nation's top arms control negotiator and the Secretary of the Air Force. The far right is using women as a tool to further their reach and present a more open, softer, and modern image appeal to women, particularly younger women. Participation and representation is the image they need at this time. These far-right and fascist movements have long been associated with male leaders, promoting subservient role for women, enforcing traditional roles within family. However, unlike the past meaning the rise of, for example, Nazi party in Germany or in Japan or in Austria, unlike the past, we see a number of women leading significant far-right parties, and significantly some claim to champion. They claim to champion gender equality and use progressive language to justify and promote their racist ideas and agenda against immigrants, particularly those from West Asia and North Africa. And in a way, they portray that they want to save the women that they are oppressed in this country from the men in West Asia and North Africa, particularly with the wave of recent immigrants, for example, close to 1 million immigrants from West Asia and North Africa in Germany. Now back, bringing it home to Iranian women and our relation with US. Iranian women for the past 40 years, the Islamic Republic regime's educational system and propaganda machine have been brainwashing and indoctrinating generation of social justice of young Iranians while planting distorted ethical and moral values and a wrapped sense of social justice into their impressionable mind. Iranian women have been fighting for their inalienable human and civil rights since the first massive protest against the mandatory hijab on February 20, 1975. Although women have been relentless in their quest to achieve equal rights and end sexism, it was the mass protest in December 2017, replacing the empty rhetoric of reformist politicians against the mandatory hijab with concrete action of girls of Enqilab Street. They gave the courage to resist against 4 decades of compulsory hijab. We all know that the hijab law is cornerstone of Islamic Republic. پاشنه آشیل جمهوری اسلامی. So opposing it is undermining the Islamic identity of regime. That's why today the regime instructed the security police, the Basij, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard to crushing particularly women in social movement and protest. I want to get to, I have the fun, so this is the last part, maybe question and answer. I share some other parts of it. Dear friends, Iranian women's movement is at critical juncture. On one hand, more than 4 decades of human rights violation, harassment, discrimination, violence against women in public and private spheres, and the undeniable lack of public will, political and public will, to take even steps towards equity and equality for women have reached to a critical social frustration. Women want change, and a growing number of women dare to speak truth and speak out against the decades of atrocities. On the other hand, the rise of the far-right movement in EU countries, and particularly US, stealing the feminist language and embedding it in the formulation of their strategy towards Iran. Resistance to compulsory hijab by Iranian women fits well with US Secretary of State Pompeo tweeting about the girl of Enqilab Avenue, who 27 December 2017 tied her hijab, a white scarf, to a stick and waved it to the crowd as a flag. Actually, Secretary of State congratulated and tweeted about it. I follow his tweets. Yet, US President and Secretary of State got off to an early start on March 13 of this year, 2019, by releasing the State Department annual Global Human Rights Report, scrubbed up all references to reproductive health and rights, and ignored legislations introduced in Congress on March 7, asking that the latest report include the fundamental sexual health and rights of women and girls. Congress has mandated the annual report since 1961. By omitting reproductive rights from the Human Rights Report for the second time in a row, the Trump administration signaled that it does not believe women's rights are worth defending. This administration has taken every opportunity to undermine sexual and reproductive rights, whether by restricting access to critical services at home here in US, or failing to hold governments accountable for human rights abuses abroad. And moreover, in March, Pompeo, the Secretary of State, dispatched a team dominated, which I was there and followed every step of them, dominated by ultra-conservative ideologues to United Nations this year in March of 2019, and I followed closely. While the sexual health with such other countries, they shared the same position as Iran and Saudi Arabia, and repeatedly the US mission asked in the UN session, don't use sexual rights, don't use even the word of gender in the final document of UN. With such So the fact is Iranian women and 4 decades heroic resistance to Islamic fundamentalists has valuable lessons learned for women in other Muslim majority countries. The collective consciousness of Iranian women and allied man, the he for she, the man who stands for gender equality, not only should continue the resistance and raising the collective voice and action, but also have to navigate the strategies of US and other countries to use Iranian women's aspiration for equality and rights as a tool for their hegemonic goal in the region. Let us not forget that in recent past, US made Afghan occupation about liberating women from Taliban, while currently negotiating rights and dignity of women of Afghanistan with Taliban. Those who are not protecting the rights and equality for American women are not friends and ally of Iranian women for gender equality and rights. Thank you.
Sobering talk and great points. Thank you so much, Elijah. Can I ask Sahaja?
Hello everyone, salam ba hamegi. Thank you so much for inviting me to this amazing conference. I'm really in awe of everyone was sharing the stage with me and the 2 amazing voices we heard before. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna say? So it's really amazing, and Electron, it's crazy because what you were just talking about is a main theme of my second novel that I'm writing, the far right, the political rise of the far right. So just my ears were going like this, and I want a copy of that and more. And I'm very grateful that you have actually really revealed some of the hypocrisy of this administration, because I think it's a mistake to go around thinking that people with blonde hair and blue eyes have, necessarily when they say they have our goodwill in heart, that it's true, that we tend to still think in that colonial terms that whatever happens here is different than what happens in Iran. And I also followed the rise of the far right. That just had nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about, but it was amazing because I also followed I lived in Italy at the time, and I followed the rise of the far right with Le Pen, and it actually led to what's happening here. So this is very exciting for me to hear this, and I haven't written. I'm a writer, and I haven't written my talk today. I'm a writer in this ensemble of incredible women today, and my first book, as it was mentioned, is about what happened in Iran after the 1979 revolution, and what happened to the political activists who weren't necessarily, in accordance with the Islamic regime, and they continued their activity and their imprisonment and the execution of so many. And these were sort of like the background of the stories I wanted to tell, because I wanted to speak about my generation and the circumstances we were born in those years, in the 80s in Iran, and sort of what happened to us after. So the book has a second part which goes into 2009 and the Green Movement, and how our generation now is trying to sort of have their own say and make their own decisions, but of course always keeping in mind what happened before. And at this point, I would say always keeping in mind what has happened also in other countries, and not also in Iran, because it's just really both makes you despair when you hear of other countries that have gone through dictatorships, exactly like in Brazil that you mentioned. And 30 years later, here we go, having one of the same generals back in power, feeling even more legitimized than maybe 30 years ago. So it's a very, very long way, I imagine, and it's not an easy way, of course, and it's a long fight, and we have to keep everything in consideration. Now, when I write in general, I am always, whatever happens, whatever story that comes to my mind, I am always fascinated, greatly fascinated with the lives of activists in general, and people who fight, and people who resist, and people who risk a lot in that path. I've always thought that when we deal with literature in general is, of course, that's sharing of stories. Now, what happens when you share stories? When you share stories, you're already creating a democratic force, because when we hear someone else's story, or when we tell our stories, we create, or we attempt to create some kind of understanding. We attempt to provoke empathy. We attempt to tell others what happened to us in its most minimal details. And I always thought that when we talk about activists, and since we have activists here today, what happens to them when they go home, for example, right? What happens when they're with their families and their loved ones? What happens when their life is at risk, and how they deal with that? All of that was really fascinating for me to tell, because I thought we have this one-dimensional aspect that we read in the news and so on. A lot of the times we don't even have names of people who fight. People who fought against fascism in Italy, or people who were fighting against, or in Spain, or in South America, and in Iran. So many times we don't have names. And I thought that it is having that privilege to have lived in a household of activists, of people who have been in prison. I thought that it was, in some ways, it gave me that privilege, but both also that intimacy with those stories, to tell those stories, to really bring it out and say, this is how they are, this is how they live, this is what they cherish, this is what they're scared of, these are what their dreams are. Now, when the book came out, a lot of the people would come to me, and a lot of non-Iranians, and would say to me, this book is filled with these strong women. What's up with that? And to me, it was really amazing. I never thought of that. I never thought that I was writing a book in which the characters are these strong women. I didn't want to make a political statement. I didn't want to make a civil statement. It was just the women that I knew and I had grown up with, and I just wanted to say how it was for them. And it was really mind-boggling, but at the same time revealing to me that people automatically thought that by writing about strong women, it was a conscious choice. Like one day I just sat there and I was like, okay, so I'm going to make all my women strong to make a statement. And that, of course, led to other things. That what do people think? And not necessarily Iran. Like why do we have this sort of distinction between strong women and weak? Like, where does that come from? Like, how are we really giving these categories? Okay, so one day wake up and decide, okay, so I'm going to be a strong woman from now on? Or, like, how does that work? Because I don't think that's how it works. I think that we all, as human beings, take our chances, make our decisions, and these are the things we are interested in and we feel passionate about, and we do our thing. But then at that point, I realized that there is that sense, that there is this category of strong women somewhere, and people sort of think of it as something separate as everybody else. And I didn't think that's true, and I don't think that's true. But then that also brought me to another point, that when these are times that, of course, with so many feminist movements going on that have always been going on, but with the Me Too and so on, and the social media has really brought it out, there's this, whenever I go and I speak to people, there's this, as if this underlying fear of, but what do you guys want as women? What do you want to do? Especially a lot of men, but also a lot of women. What do you really want to do? What's going to happen to us? This is sometimes men who ask. And to me, it's like, okay, so first of all, whenever there was a minority sort of working and fighting for something better, of course the people in power were always frightened by that. So when these questions are asked and that fear sort of comes out, I realize that it's always the same story. Once it could be women, another time it could be an immigrant, it could be a religious minority, and so on. It's always the same story. When that movement is taking shape and taking speed, everybody else that in some ways don't feel particularly that they belong to that movement, I don't know why they don't, feel scared about that. So this is where I think literature comes in, or the power of telling stories. When we tell stories, first of all, at this point, also women who tell stories, and they are both the protagonist of their stories and the narrator of that story. So that is double power, right? I'm going to say things the way they are. I'm not going to say things the way you like to hear, or I'm not going to say things the way I'd like them to be. I'm going to say them the way they are. And in that, when that happens, when I, as a writer, or so many other writers, and I'm talking about fiction writers, when we say stories. So when I bring you into my home, which is that story, you will realize that everything that I go through, everything that character goes through, that character's pain, that character's hopes, that character's dreams, that character's fears, that character's despair, all of that is exactly the way you feel them. And there is absolutely nothing different about that, because we all do, as Toni Morrison says, we all belong to that human race, and the only race that exists. So when that happens, there is that the connection, the first contact is established. I bring you, you trust me. Trust is very important in fiction. You trust me to take you where I want to take you. And in that moment, there is that negotiation that happens as well. Whatever you want to take from it and whatever I want to give you, and then it's up to you to decide, and then you keep reading. Now, the problem is, when it comes to women, that a lot of women, we read a lot of books. Okay, this is true. Like, the huge part of the, at least the American readership, is women. And women read men as well. And women read women. Now, when it comes to men don't read women that much. Okay? This is especially true in fiction. I have more, since I've been in contact with fiction a lot more. This is especially true with fiction. When a man sees, like, these are statistics. I don't have them, but these are things that have been studied upon. When men see books written by other men, they would go to those books, and it has been historical. Now, we're talking about a history when, at least in America, sometimes women had to go under a male name to be able to publish, especially if they were good. If they weren't so good, maybe people didn't care. But nobody would believe that you are a woman and you could be that good. So they would have a better chance of publishing under another name, usually a male name. There's another story that goes that Tolstoy loved Jane Austen, but he would always hide the book under his mattress so that nobody would know that Tolstoy reads Jane Austen. Now, we have come a long way, and I do love Tolstoy, and we have come a long way, to at least not hiding the books written by women under our mattresses. But it's still a fact that we still don't get that. When there are conferences, when there are men present as well as women present, you automatically feel. And because of that, women have to always, actually, we have to sort of, men just say, oh, but you guys are supporting each other all the time. Yes, because there is that lag. We have to show it even more, you know? And this doesn't mean I have, maybe my all-time favorite author is a man, but I also have many women writers. So it's not like I'm going to love this because it's a woman. I'm trying to be fair, but a lot of men, unfortunately, are not. And in the publishing world, it is really amazing because they're all women. Most writers are women, our editors are women, our publishers are women, our agents are women, but the people who write the critics are not women. They're mostly men. And who makes it all go around? All those critics. Because if a critic doesn't bring your book and wants to write a review on it, you haven't moved a step upward. So it's really amazing when that happens, and it gets even more amazing. A woman tried to publish a book. When you want to publish a book, especially in America, you have to find an agent. You can't publish without an agent. So she sent her book to about 20 agents to make an inquiry. You know, I'm querying, this is my book, would you like to present me? And again, many of the agents, about 80% are women. The woman was either they did not answer to her, or she was rejected by all of those agents, female agents. She changed her name to a man. She sent the exact same query letter, the exact same first 3 chapters. About 10 to 12 agents, I don't remember, they answered back. They wanted the book. I don't even need to add anything to what I just said. So it's a world where we have to also sometimes fight against that status quo that is also being in some ways upheld by women, by other women. And these are women who represent us, who go out there really, really like sweating and crying and laughing for us so that our voice gets out there. But before that, they still have that discrimination in mind. That if you're that, probably, maybe we can even give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't think the man is going to sell as much as the woman. That's also true. But it's a total way of thinking that we are trying to change it day by day. I know many young writers, women writers, that are making it on the bestseller list and on all kind of rewards. So it's a train that has already moved on. But we just need, and of course, as everybody, of course, but also writers alone, we just need that push, that extra support so we can take our words out there. Because we need that power. Because if we don't tell our stories, nobody else will, I think. Thank you.
For, the self-sacrificing, no character mother. That was it. And it was thanks to writers like you that we have this image of real women in our fiction. Thank you so much. And I will now ask Shadi John to start her talk.
Sure. Hi everybody. I'm so happy and grateful to be around this powerful and credible crowd. As Sarah mentioned about the power of story, I would like to start my speech with the stories of women who experience domestic violence. A few years ago, before we initiated the Ranch project, Somalia was residing in a small village. She was pregnant. Her husband physically abused her and locked her up in his farm afterward. Somalia spent 2 days in an animal stable without food in order for no one in Somalia's family or even her friends to find out about the abuse. Her husband decided to keep her locked up until all of her bruisiness from his attack were gone. As a result of his violent attack and Somaya's subsequent 2 days detention, Somaya lost her baby. Her baby would have been alive. Somaya's daily routine as a mother would have been changed, and more parenting story would have been shared and inspired if Somaya had the right support and community around her. I still imagine Somaya and her child holding their hand, playing around, laughing together. Normalizing of domestic violence followed by the Iranian regime is the main reason that many of us are still unaware of Somaya's story. But we should not allow Somaya and her child to be forgotten. It is our duty to hold ourselves accountable for any more lives lost to domestic violence in Iran or any other countries. According to my experiences, when you tell the story of violence victim, the story of ones like Somaya, you are in transition. You are shedding yourself. You are shedding who you are and becoming who they were destined to be. You might even think about what you would do if you were in their position. I'm sure many of you are putting yourself in Somaya's place right now. You try to feel what her pain and suffering look like. But you know your thoughts, your imagination are not real. You know you can get out of our head anytime you want. But for Somaya and ones like her, things were different. Their suffering was real. Their pain was real. Speaking of pain, I still remember the pain in one of my clients' voice when she tried to explain how her husband had verbally abused and insulted her. She was so embarrassed and ashamed by her husband's insults that she ultimately wasn't able to even repeat the words he used when describing to me what exactly had happened. Her husband couldn't tolerate his image tarnished by disobedience and patriarchal values as expected help him justify what he already wanted to do. What would I do if my sister was being abused by her husband? It was a question that I instantly asked myself when she told me her story, to be honest. I hate this question, as if our opposition to verbal and physical assault in this proportion to the numbers of sisters that we have. But I couldn't get such question out of my head. I still cannot. As a lawyer practicing family law for 4 years in Iran, I had seen case after case of female victims of domestic violence and abuse at the hands of their husbands. What made matters worse was the lack of social education and disregard for this type of behavior. The majority of my clients were uneducated and didn't have enough general knowledge about domestic violence. What compounded the problem further was that the victims that I was assisting were mainly being advised by those close to them in their immediate family as well as local community, who would wrongfully encourage them to put up with their situation or deliberately ignore the incidents for the sake of their family's honor or reputation. Remember, when you put up with domestic violence, you do not save your marriage or provide a better future for your children. You indeed contribute to the cultural acceptance of domestic violence. You allow the circle of the violence to define you. You allow it to dictate your responses to another abuse. You even help the abuser dare to exercise his power over another vulnerable victim. Such stories kept me up at night, got me thinking about the domestic violence, how to end it, how to address it from different angles, how to empower the victims and not stigmatize them. The story of those who were suffering in silence finally motivated me to turn my anger into something positive. I teamed up with Net Freedom Pioneers in order to create a tangible tool with an Iran Kubatar project that can help the women of Iran navigate this type of distressing situation. We developed a multi-language app called Torrent, as you see. As of now, Torrent provides Farsi and soon Kurdish language content to women who seek professional help and support. Torrent enables girls and women at risk of violence, regardless of their marital status, to ask for immediate help through a panic button. Let me elaborate on this a bit more. Torrent acts as a method of quick communication, notifying trusted friends of a victim abuse the moment it begins. Victim can safely and discreetly send a series of pre-drafted text messages to selected contacts. The text messages read, "Call the police, get here fast," or any other message that user would like to prepare. This can be done at simple touch of the app's help button. Furthermore, the app shares the victim's GPS signal to inform these contacts of the victim's location. We believe that Torrent's panic button provides a sense of security for those who are at risk, a feeling that you are not alone, regardless of how isolated you think you are. We also offer practical resources such as pre-filled court papers to our high-risk audience in need of legal measures through our app's feature. Legal documents and guidelines pertaining to victims' rights and the feeling of abuse complaints are also available on Torrent to read and download. In the article tab, user can read different educational resources pertaining to healthy understanding of relationship, the type of domestic violence in the workplace, the type of domestic violence in the workplace, what are the immediate action that person should do after rape or etc. The app also contains a list of suggested local experts whose surveyors may contact for support: family attorneys, counselor, law enforcement officer, and advocates. Lastly, Torrent user can complete the assessment of their current relations with others through the app. The assessment not only provides questions which women should consider in regards to the healthiness of their relationship, but also determine the prospective abusiveness of the user's current partnership. The assessment helps people to look at their current relationship through different lenses, to see this scene from different points of view, and make the right decision in a comprehensive way. In addition to our documents, we reach people through our workshops in chosen areas, especially in rural areas where the high rate of domestic violence has been reported, to raise awareness of Torrent and the benefit it can bring. We reached new people, collected news stories, encouraged domestic violence victims to break their silence, and eventually referred the victims to our support team. In addition to increasing knowledge and awareness, our workshop have helped to reveal our measures. There might be new challenges facing our communities that we are still not aware. Through our workshops and the feedback that we receive, we upgrade ourselves and change for the better as we encourage our society to change for the better. For the upcoming years, we will hold up to 700-hour workshop on pre-marriage education for youth in rural areas and up to 800-hour workshop on life skills at the poor neighborhood of large cities. Instead of coming up with a broad range of topics and educational courses, we intend to categorize our topic courses regarding the victims' urgent needs. Although the majority of domestic violence victims share a lack of knowledge on fundamental issues, some may need different knowledge and approach concerning the characteristics of their case. In this way, we can provide help for different people in different situations. Torange has helped more than 60,000 Iranian women so far. We are now working on new features that are more easily accessed by women with disabilities and the iOS version of the Torange app. We look forward to advancing the scope of work of Torange and serve broader audience by translating Torange to the languages of ethnic minorities of Iran, including Azeri, Arabic, etc., and localizing content in accordance with local issues, and also translating Torange to the languages of any other country. Although empowering women has been our #1 priority during the last couple of years, we are eager to expand our sources of coverage for other minority groups such as LGBTQ, individuals at risk of violence, both at home and beyond, or even suicidal people or those in need of mental health support. I would like to wrap up my speech with a comment from one of Torange users. I would like to call her Somaya, the one we did save, the one we could reach when she needed help. She said, I'm happy that finally someone tries to help us. We are living in rural area and no one cares about the condition of our life and destiny. Thanks for caring. Thank you.
Technology for the right reason can affect day-to-day lives out in rural. Thank you so much. We're now opening for questions, but I would like to ask our previous speaker, Parveen Agrawal, to also join us here because I know we've cut her Q&A time short. So if she can join us up here, that would be great. And if you can go to the 2 microphones that we have for questions and comments. It has a game, a matching game. Can you match the picture?
villages or small cities. So do all the women have access to this kind of cell phone, or also what's the source of your finance? Who is helping to finance these people that teaching? And my last question is, if you have a support center that we can help, that you can buy more cell phones or something for people to have access, also please give us a little bit more information that how we can support from here. Elijah, regarding
Can I interrupt you for a minute? Can we have the answer first and then you ask?
just one question, then I will speak. For in previous talk, you talked about SIDA a little bit. It looks like you are also familiar with that. Can you a little bit tell us about the history of SIDA, and are they working with other organizations and things? Because I don't know that much about SIDA. Thank you.
Thank you. Shazia?
Yes, regarding your first question, that you asked about the rural city, yeah, this is what our challenges, because in this area, especially in these areas, a lot of people don't have access. Okay. Don't have access to or don't know how to use the tech. But what we did in this area, we come up with the idea of having workshops. So through our workshops, and as you saw the pictures of our workshop, people in smart cities and rural area gathering together, and we educate them about how they can use it or how can get support from our experts. This is the thing that we, or like more speaking about these things to be more, to can be like more people friendly about these things. And also about the budget, we don't have a like large budget. It's more by fundraising or people who care about this issue. And what was the other? One of the very important ways that we need support is, as I mentioned, we have expertise in Iran or here that they help women in this situation. So like lawyers and psychological help and these things. This is like for community that can help us to bring or finding new people who are having the same cause can help us to provide more support for women that searching for help through Torrent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am somewhat familiar with the history of SIDA. As some of you know, the first UN Women Conference was in 1975 in Mexico City, and then in 1979 SIDA was proposed and approved. And then an American woman that I personally knew her at the time, she was an activist, Billie Heller. She passed away. She was living in Los Angeles. So she came back from that session of UN that passed SIDA, and then she was passionate about passing SIDA in US. So I knew her, and I was passionate about Bill of Rights for Women. So I used to go to her home, and we were publishing a newsletter way back in 1985 or 80 to 85 on SIDA and mailing it to people. But then I was part of the Women's Intercultural Network since Beijing conference, and Marilyn Fowler, the president of Women's Intercultural Network in 2013 when we were at UN, she said that so we should find another way to pass SIDA in US now that the government doesn't take action, so we want to push it bottom up. So the idea of cities for SIDA, meaning ratifying it at the city level, like what San Jose did or what we did in Long Beach, or of course in Long Beach we passed a resolution, but in city of Los Angeles, actually 10 counties have ratified SIDA, and so that was there is a website, a very good website, Cities for SIDA, which is being managed by Women's Intercultural Network, which I'm on their board. And so we pass information about what cities, there are some resources on that, and I would be happy if anybody wants some more information. But I want to encourage all of you, whether you live in a small cities, to pursue that and pass it particularly. It's very important that, particularly in this juncture in US, we take action at local level and move forward. And the goal is by 2025, we have 100 cities in US passing SIDA.
Thank you. Susan?
خیلی ممنون از سخنرانی بسیار عالیتون. الهی جان، ممکنه که بعد از اینکه این ریپورتتون رو پابلیش کردن یه جوری به ما خبر بدید که بتونیم ازش استفاده کنیم. یه کامنت هم برای سرتون دارم. خیلی ممنون، واقعا تمام information. Do I speak in English? Okay. Thank you very much. Well, all the speakers woke me up. I was going to fall asleep after such a great lunch. Thank you. Please, Elijah, let us know when you have your report published so we can look at it. It sounds very interesting. For Sarah, I got so much, you gave us so much information about women and women writing and how their writing, we sort of knew that their writing doesn't get as much accolade as other guys do, but the percentages are amazing. This is really just opened up my eyes. I have a question for Khanum Shadi. You know that the next step for any abusive relationship is, if you know that takes place, is with the police and with the authorities. So I was just wondering how, if you talked about all the people that are involved in getting help to these abused people, what happened after that? Is there, how do the authorities in Iran, they interact with people who are abused? Like here in this country, up to a few years ago, they even now in some states, they consider as a family matter, and they don't follow it up. How it is in Iran? Thank you.
As you mentioned, we find out that police in Iran might not be that much useful for women in dangerous situation. So we offer the circle of friends, trusted friend that they have to contact them in emergency situation. also about the following up with their situation. If people come to us in workshops and household our household visits, yeah, we can follow up with them. But through the app, because of their security and because they don't have any account on the app, we cannot follow up with their situation. But we just have an option for emergency situation they can use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, and thank you so much for wonderful talk, wonderful activity you do. So congratulations. And thank you, Voices of Women, for such a conference to make my dear friend Tarana happy. I start my question with the comments. And recently we have everywhere in the women's conference, in Hollywood, in media, we hear about the women's leadership. The solution is women's leadership. And as we saw the code, most of the earlier on the slide, most of the feminists, they believe by the equality happens when the women have control of making the laws, vote, and all this. And before I ask my question is, we have seen lots of women in the leadership that they haven't done anything for the women's rights. They haven't done anything to heal the world. And since the masculinity energy of the world control the femininity of human race, and we have seen long time, even we as a woman, being treated, raised, generation by generation, under the men's thinking and the value. So by replacing somebody with vagina, I don't think it's going to resolve the situation. As you said, all the editors, 80% they are the women. They haven't solved the situation. In Silicon Valley, there are the women that they have a ability to, and they got more raised than men at the same level. So we have, I think, after all these years being in the women's activist boards and hearing all the stories, the fiction and all these stories, I think for us it's the best thing to find out what is the value of the femininity and what this leadership would bring that is different from the rest of the world so far we have seen. When we, in the conferences, we fight with each other, women. We have ego, we fight over the power and fame. And so how we can resolve that? So my question to every one of you is, what is the women's leadership to you? And one of the value of the female's value that you are really promoting in your activity that we can learn as a woman. What is that? Thank you so much.
Could I ask from our panel who would like to answer that first? You want to go first?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I have been thinking about it a lot, and I don't have straightforward answer or solution. I do, however, believe that when we talk about justice and equality and freedom, either social justice, economical justice, political justice, we are still talking about the human race. We are not talking about a particular part of humanity. We're talking about everybody. So when I think of a just society, I think of it as a society where everyone's rights is considered and respected and given more than anything. So I don't think, just as in Elijah's talk when she said that all the CEOs were women, and also you yourself pointed out. So if the mentality is still that, it's the mentality of the, let's say, powerful over the powerless, let's say, it doesn't matter who's leading it. It's that mentality, that system that is wrong, that has to be constantly and every day challenged and fought against. And I think that was something something that Karen should also, when she brought in the sort of the new liberalist ideas and thoughts that is sort of imposed on society. So I think it's an overall that has many dimensions. So I don't want to live in a society where just because that person is a woman, she should be my leader. I want to know what she thinks, and how she gives voice to those thoughts. And that is exactly why in the last elections, yes, I did vote for Hillary Clinton, but I wanted Bernie. So it's not, I didn't want just someone, I didn't want our best, I wanted our best women out there, not just a woman out there. And I think that's actually it could be really, really destructive for us, I think, to have someone who actually does not represent our values and has that facade, that feminine facade, but doesn't really represent our values and doesn't really stand for justice and equality and human rights. Let's fight for that.
Well, Sahar did such a good job. I second what she said, but also simply women's leadership, having women in leadership position, it's not about biology. We want feminist leadership. We want women that have feminist perspective and have the best interest of women in their heart and in their mind to be in leadership position. Majority of what the House of Representatives in Iran, Majlis has passed, and it's against the best interest of Iranian women, was voted by the narrow representation of women in Iranian parliament. So it's not about biology. We want women that have feminist perspective, that they're avant-garde, and they know the best interest of women. And there are some men that can represent that best interest of women in their heart and their mind. And as part of UN campaign, there is now a campaign, and I appreciate all the men in this conference also, He for She. It's a global campaign because we know that the issue of women is not only about women. Men are part of gender equality activism in the world. So simply, it's not the biology.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to the next question on this side.
Thank you. My question is for Parveen. Thank you all panelists. I really enjoyed it. I asked my question in English, but I wonder if Parveen can answer my question in Farsi, because I think majority are here in Farsi, and I heard that your talk would lead better in Farsi, have a better understanding. So I want to formulate one question around your topic. I was wondering how could you at least give us some example about challenges of a diverse movement, and assuming that feminism is a diverse movement, we have different kind of feminism. Feminists these days they talk about feminisms, right? So considering that feminism is a diverse movement, how would you highlight some of the challenges that you face as a feminist who have a history of fighting in Iran and abroad? So I would really appreciate if you could share some of your experiences with us. Thank you.
من این مقدار توی صحبتام مثال زدم، ولی ولی میخوام خیلی مثال عینی بگم در خود این قضیه. به تجربه خودم میگم وقتی که اومدم سوئد، چون من وقتی که ایران بودم خیلی راحت همه چیز برام مشخص‌تر بود. به راحتی میتونستم بگم که من مدافع علیه خشونت علیه زنان هستم، میجنگم براش و با حجاب اجباری مخالفم و اینا همه چیزایی بودش که خیلی راحت میشد حرفشو زد. ولی وقتی که اومدم سوئد و با فمینیستای سوئدی و با فضای سوئدی ارتباط برقرار کردم، بعضی وقتا مجبور میشدم سکوت کنم به خاطر اینکه فقط مسئله مثلا الزاما بحث خشونت نبود، چون با چیزهای دیگه هم قاطی میشد. به عنوان مثال بحث‌های خشونت ناموسی که ما خیلی راحت ازش تو ایران حرف میزدیم و بحث میکردیم، در سوئد شما باید مراقب بودی که کجا داری این حرف رو میزنی و چجوری باید حرف بزنی، برای اینکه مثلا خیلی راحت میتونستی مدافع در خط راسیستا قرار بگیری. وقتی مثلا یه راسیستی برمیگشت میگفتش که به من برگشت گفتش که آره ما شماها با خارجی موافقیم ولی فقط زنای شما رو ما خیلی میپسندیم به خاطر اینکه مردا تو خشونت طلبن که تو فرهنگتون خشونته. من تازه باید اونجا از مردمون هم دفاع میکردم به خاطر اینکه حالا ما داریم میگیم مردم خشونت مشکل دارن، ولی بحث وقتی که میرسه اونجا حالا دیگه شما اونجا خودت ناموسی میشی، برات میشه فکر میکنی باید دفاع کنم که این مسئله فرهنگی نیست، این ساختاریه و این ساختار در اینجا به شما میگن شما مریضی اگه مرد خشونت طلبه، ولی وقتی مثلا تو ایران مرد این کارو میکنه تبدیل میشه به اینکه فقط فرهنگشه. یا مثلا بحث حجاب که مطرح میشد، من اونجا تو ایران داشتم از علیه حجاب اجباری حرف میزدم یا مینوشتم یا به هر حال اون محدودیتایی که داشتیم، ولی اونجا مجبور بودم که با خانمی که مدافع مسلمان بود و مورد حمله‌های راسیستی قرار گرفته بود بشینم و دفاع کنم. برای همین میخوام بگم که وضعیت خیلی پیچیده است. با این شکل نگاه میکنیم ما نمیتونیم که فقط روی یک نکته حرکت بکنیم و بگیم که خب پس این خواسته من همینه که هست. مجبوریم که دفاع بکنیم ولی مجبوریم که حتی مرزهای خودمون رو مشخص کنیم. بنابراین من روزهای مثلا ماهای اول خیلی راحت راجع به خشونت و اینا حرف می‌زدم، من به تدریج مجبور شدم که ببینم کجا دارم چی میگم، ولی خودم سانسور نکنم، خودم تصحیح بکنم، نه تصحیح از نظر اینکه کارکت باشم، نه تصحیح از اینکه بدونم که در کدوم باز قرار گرفتم. از این منظری که داشتم توضیح می‌دادم که هرچند که ما جلوتر میریم چون مسائل با هم در هم تنیده‌تر میشن، نمیتونیم بگیم که این مسائل از هم جدا هستن و به خصوص وقتی بحث فمینیسم میشه برای من فمینیسم یه مسئله جدیه. یعنی فکر میکنم فمینیسم یه روشی برای فکر کردن، یه راهی بهم نشون میده که چجوری برم. به همین خاطری که وقتی داریم راجع به فمینیسم حرف میزنیم، اون وقتی راجع به خشونت میشه میتونم بگم که از نظر فمینیستی که بهش اعتقاد دارم خشونت کجاست، مثلا چقدر با میلیتاریسم فاصله داره، چقدر با نئولیبرالیسم فاصله داره. برای همینه که مجبوریم چند بچه‌ای نگاه بکنیم، نه به نوعی میشن اینترسکشنال نگاه بکنیم به مسئله.
Just wondering if anybody needed that in English. Could you raise your hand? Oh. I'll just make a short summary. I'm not as eloquent as Parvinjan here, but she was giving an example of how what you say might be heard differently. For example, how easily in Iran she could speak against the forced hijab, but being in Sweden, when she was faced with colonialist and fascist or racist counterparts, it had another meaning where they thought, oh, people from your country, all the men are, violent. They were like distancing, and so she had to choose where she would speak out against it. How it was heard was also important, not just what you said. So she had to always keep that in mind, and it changed that. So the dynamic is very complex. With the point that I think you were making, that you can't just say the same thing and expect that it would resonate the same way no matter where you say it. And thus maneuvering that, and because feminism is such an important belief and mode of operation for Parveen, she had to maneuver that very carefully. Thank you.
I just want to add, as Parveen said, the context is everything. There are different contexts kind of, as you mentioned.
Thank you. Our next question over there.
All right, I actually have comments here, and they're inspired by Sahar's talk. So one thing you mentioned when you were talking, you said you kind of want to look at how like activist personal life is. And that's kind of, to me, is like how Quentin Tarantino looks at criminals' life. So for me, you're Quentin Tarantino of Iranian activists. I want to share that. And then, though I haven't read your novel yet, I'm in the first chapter, so I would ratify that. No, actually, the first few pages I read, it has so much going on in the first few pages. You can actually feel their nervousness, that the environment really comes through. So far, so good. The second thing I wanted to talk about, you said there were so many strong women in your chapter, and people were surprised with that. And I wanted to mention two things. I think a lot of people are familiar with post-traumatic disorder. But nobody's heard from post-traumatic growth, which is something that's happened when you go through a trauma, and instead of folding on yourself and going down, you actually open up, you grow, and that comes with being empowered in a way. Either it's writing that gives you power, you make a garden, it gives you power, and you, instead of, being little, you become more. And we have a lot of trauma in Iran, so maybe that's why we have so many strong women in Iran. Either way, I kind of want our panelists, if they have any thoughts about that, if they want to share anything about how we can use that to grow more power for women. It's kind of an open question.
Well, I think actually that's a really good point that you made, because it is true. It is true. You can have two different ways of dealing with it, which is either, like, as you say, sort of, close in on yourself and not want to do anything anymore, or you're going to fight. And I think it's true in Iran, because I think when you go through a trauma, it does awaken certain parts of your psychology and your emotional development that maybe in a normal quote-unquote life, that wouldn't have been awakened. Now, not necessarily that's a good thing, I hope for everyone to go through their entire life without trauma of any kind. But nevertheless, it does bring light to certain things, and it makes you in some ways sensitive to the same things maybe, or even to certain emotions that maybe other people are blind to, or to certain understandings that maybe other people have more of a theoretical grasp of. And I think that gives you, if you are willing to take that as, I don't want to use the word challenge, but as something to confront and then build yourself on, I think then you are starting with a certain depth that maybe you have at least reached a certain depth a lot quicker because of that event. Now again, let our lives always be without trauma, but once that happens, then maybe it does bring out that strength, because you can build yourself on that sensibility and on that awareness, and sort of form your fight and your struggles around that. So I think it's a very good point, to tell you the truth.
Thank you. And did anybody else want to comment on that? If not, I think we're unfortunately, okay, Shadi, but I just want to say for questions, I think we're out of time.
Actually, we decided, since we really were enjoying this question, we're going to shorten the break to 10 minutes, so we're going to continue 20 more minutes to quick Q&A and then have a 10-minute break.
Thank you for 10 more minutes. Okay. Glad to hear. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this is the same way that I came up with the idea. If I don't know, should I say fortunately or unfortunately? Yeah, unfortunately, but when I saw a lot of women, when I be contacted with a lot of women with the same issue, and then we became more active about and more caring. Before that, I didn't know about. But after that, I couldn't forget them. I think this is the way that, unfortunately, help us to become more active.
Thank you, everyone. My question is for Parveen and Elahejan. If you could please talk about the activism of Iranian women or activism regarding women's rights outside the country, here abroad, America and Europe. Types of it, impact of it, and the Iranian women's movement inside Iran, or status of women in Iran, its efficacy, comparison of different types of activism outside the country, outside Iran. Whatever you think is worth mentioning, and I would appreciate it if Parveen Jani could speak in Farsi, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
اگه درست فهمیده باشم منظورتون بود که اکتیویسم در ایران و خارج از ایران رو درباره زنان چجوری می‌بینن؟
به ویژه تاثیر کمپین‌های خارج از کشور در داخل کشور چی هست؟ میزان موفقیتش، تاثیرش و چطوری مقایسه می‌کنید؟
سالتون الان 10 ساله که خارج
برای بیشتر از ما تجربه هر دو.
من اگه بخوام در موقعی که تو کانتکست ایران بودم میخوام نگاه بکنم، خب یکی از چیزایی که برای ما خیلی مهم بود این بود که چطوری از تجربیات جنبش‌های زنان توی کشورهای دیگه یاد بگیریم و بتونیم اونها رو درونی کنیم و بعد تو اون کانتکست استفاده بکنیم. خب یکی از مهمترینش همون تجربه کمپین بود که بحث ایده کمپین زنان مراکشی رو گرفتیم و بعد اون رو تو کانتکست خودمون تو ایران تعریفش کردیم و اون شکل دیگه بهش داریم. در نتیجه یادگیری از تجربه خارج کشور خیلی مهم بود برای ما و الان هم من باز فکر میکنم که این قضیه همچنان مهمه و وقتی که خارج از کشور من اومدم راستش رو بخواین یکی از مشکلاتی که خودم داشتم توی مثلا سوئد که بود این بودش که معمولا وقتی شما عنوان خارجی میایم اگر که به عنوان یه آدم باشید که وارد شدیم و قرار برگردیم خب خیلی چیزا دوست دارن ازتون یاد بگیرم، ولی وقتی که به عنوان خارجی اومدیم حالا موندگار شدیم حالا شما اینو باید اینتگریت بشیم با این جامعه و یاد بگیریم، در نتیجه شکلش باز متفاوت میشه. من مثلا وقتی که اومدم یکی از بحثایی که همیشه مطرح بود این بودش که مثلا فمینیست‌ها از من پرسن خب حالا شما چه کمکی ما میتونیم بهتون بکنیم؟ من بحث هم بودش که شما رو سوالو عوض کنیم، بهتره که ما به هم بگیم که چه کمکی ما به هم میتونیم بکنیم، چون ما تمام مدت وقتی که تو ایران هستیم سعی می‌کنیم از تجربه خارجی یاد بگیریم، وقتی هم اینجا هستیم خوبی از تجربه کسایی که وارد میشن یاد بگیریم چون شما اینجا میزبان هستید. در نتیجه بحثایی که وجود داشت این بودش که به طور مثال مثلا روی کاری که خودم از پلتفرم موومنت استفاده کردم و توی سوئد به کار بردم در ارتباط با اینویزیبیلیتی زنان مهاجر در مالمو به عنوان یک کیس استادی از تجربه کمپین استفاده کردم و بهشون گفتم ما تجربه همون باید به صورت زنجیر با هم دیگه ارتباط داشته باشه و به همین دلیل که میتونیم مثلا یاد بگیریم. به همین خاطر چیزی که مهمه اینه که چجوری داریم میبینیم و چجوری داریم باهاشون برخورد میکنیم و تو تجربیاتی که الان هم مثلا باهاش توی خارج کشور برخورد میکنم هنوز فکر میکنم تجربیات موومنت های دیگه رو با اینکه من تو سوئد هستم از تجربه دیگه شون ندیدم، ولی مثلا اتفاقاتی که تو زنان هند میفته، فعالیت‌های فمینیست‌ها توی هند، توی آرژانتین، همه اینا من فکر کنم هنوز خیلی تاثیرگذارتر هستش تا کشورهایی مثل سوئد که من هستم. بخاطر اینکه یکی از مشکلاتی که من از اول برام سخت بود فهمش توی این کشورها این بودش که مدام باید به من میگفتن موومنت ولی من هیچ موومنتی نمیدیدم جز پروژه و این یکی از آسیب دهنده ترین بخشایی بودش که شما میدیدین که ملت طرحی میریزن تحت عنوان موومنت براش پول میگیرن و بعد چون پولش زمان داره تبدیل میشه به پروژه و پروژه چون باید تمام بشه دیگه بنابراین موومنتی وجود نداره. به همین خاطر برای من هنوز هم این قضیه خیلی مسئله است و فکر میکنم که یکی از آسیب‌هایی که موومنت هایی که اینجا میگیرن اینه که منبع مالی دارن و این منبع مالی باعث میشه که شما از اول به اول شروع اتمام پروژه فکر بکنیم و اون رو بذاریم کنار. این چیزی بودش که ما توی ایران باهاش حداقل یا میترسیدیم پول بگیریم یا حداقل سعی میکردیم از وقت آزاد خودمون استفاده بکنیم. به خاطر همین هستش که اون چیزی رو که توی بستر داخلی ایران من میدیدم به نظرم خیلی واقعی تر بود. البته خیلی از فعالیت‌هایی که بعداً از خارج به اینجا کشیده شد تبدیل شد به یه سری کارهای پروژه‌ای، یعنی در واقع خیلی هستن که دارن از پروژه‌های فرهنگی در با حوزه‌های مختلف زنان و چیزهای دیگه استفاده می‌کنن و در داخل ایران هم ارتباط دارن و خیلی هم تاثیر آگاهی بخش هم دارن. ولی به نظر من اون مفهوم موومنت رو ازش جدا کردن و این یکی از بحثایی که در حوزه ایران هم من فکر می‌کنم توصیف پذیر می‌کنه شاید.
Sorry, before you answer, I will try and very shortly make a summary of what Parvin was just talking about. And she was talking about how the movement in Iran and feminist movement outside Iran, how do they correlate and how they can help each other. And the main point Parvin was making was that when she was in Iran and they were in Iran, they actually learned a lot from other feminist movements. For example, the movement of the campaign for 1 million signatures that happened in Iran, they were actually inspired by a movement of Moroccan women and the campaign they had. So there's definitely a lot that women's movements and outside of Iran can affect women in Iran. But she was saying that really has been a challenge that she faces living in Sweden now, because she sees a lot of movements becoming actually just projects, because there's always a lot of money also involved. So it starts as a movement, we're going to do this or that, and they get some budget, but then after they get the budget, it becomes all about managing that budget, start and end, and they kind of loses track of the movement part of it, the part that is so important. Another point that she made was that when you visit another country, like if you're coming from Iran as a guest speaker, they want to hear from you what you have to say, but then when you go somewhere to live, like immigrating to Sweden, then people expect you to just change and just start adapting to that country. And so she would be asked a lot of times, how can we help you? To which she would answer, how can we help each other? It's not just one way, it's how can we help each other. Coming from another country doesn't mean, it means that I still have a lot that I can offer you. And she was saying that also she has tried to focus on, for example, the movement and the campaign for immigrant women in Sweden. And oral history of immigrant women, but in a platform of movement. Do you want to add to that? As you can see, she never tires and continues to be such an activist. But I think the main point I took away was that you have to always be mindful of not losing track of the movement and of that whole idea that you even started with, and not get bogged down with managing the project, and be always careful of where the money is coming from and how that will tie you in. Was there anything I missed?
No, thank you.
Thanks. Please go ahead.
Actually, Parni and John translate so good that I'm inclined to talk in Farsi. Farsi بیشتر به دلم میشینه. It's amazing that I haven't talked to Parvin for maybe 8-9 years. And what she just said is my position too. And to respond to your question, I think that there are a lot of bright, resilient, active Iranian women in diaspora. We all know that. You all are representing those. Every cities we go in Europe or United States, we see all these empowered women with dedication and commitment to gender equality in Iran. But why we are here where we are? I think the lack of coalition building, networking, collaboration among various women's groups and individuals, it's a barrier to having a collective voice as a woman in diaspora that supports Iranian women inside Iran. So that's one aspect, and that's very close to my heart because I work with Mediators Beyond Borders, and the reason that I was interested in conflict resolution and peace building and dialogue and understanding is that I feel a great gap of that, not only in Iranian opposition political movement, but also in women's movement. Because we all, and this is not only to a lesser extent, I'm engaged, I was very engaged and still very engaged with Women's March in US that brought, for example, 500,000 women to streets of Los Angeles. At their first inaugural convention, I had 2 workshops, and one of the workshops was about coalition building and collaboration among various American groups that build the movement of Women's March, which right now has lots of tension inside of it. So it is important that so that I see that's something that I'm very committed to contribute to it in my own humble and small ways, to bring people together, to have dialogue, to have a network, and to utilize our resources, intellectual resources, energy in a more positive way for advancing the cause of gender equality in Iran. And but there are lots of activities happening. There are lots of campaigns, and many of you are involved in it. But I want to emphasize that I hope we have more dialogue and more cohesiveness, more bringing together our resources to defend, for example, all these women that now are being arrested. There is a new wave of oppression in Iran on gender equality. I had the names and some pages, so I had limited time. But for taking off their hijab, they get 25, 24, 17 years sentences, which is not acceptable in any forms and shape. It brings a lot of frustration for us. What we can do, I mean, definitely all of us in diaspora, we can play a role, we can be their voice, but we're not connected. We don't have even a network to build that collective voice. So hopefully, and the other thing is, many of the Iranian women's group, or even in our opposition movement, political, we're kind of circulating among ourselves. We are not the voice of Iranian women in the broader societal things. We're talking to each other. We're liking each other's pages. We don't go out to take this voice outside. So that's another gap that I see, and I hope we collectively can overcome.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time now. I know some of you had some more questions. During the break, I'm sure our speakers will be happy to talk to you. I want to thank again all our wonderful speakers, and we'll have a 10-minute break. Thank you.
in several ways, but one of those being the Me Too movement, targeting perpetrators of violence against women. I apologize for using the computer. It's a pet peeve of mine. We just moved and I couldn't find my printer, so please bear with me. Do you ever hear a story or read something in a history book and ask yourself what it would be like to live through a moment like that? To be there when something monumental is formed? Me too. On October 15, 2007, actress Alyssa Milano tweeted the following message: If you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write "Me Too" as a reply to this tweet. Beneath was an image of the following text along with her own words, "Me Too." Suggested by a friend, if all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote "Me Too" as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. I admit I may have rolled my eyes at this because I knew the magnitude of the problem already, but I support spreading awareness in any way I can, no matter how trivial, so I wrote my own Me Too post, and I included the explanation text. I had no idea that I was witnessing the birth of a movement. I was surprised people responded to my own post, not because I didn't think I knew women who had experienced harassment. I think most of us in here can say we know women or have been those women ourselves. But it's never a frequent topic of conversation because of all the shame and stigma attached to being a victim. Other comments, not on my own post, which stayed positive, there were other comments that were a stark, eye-opening plunge into the world of rape culture. And I want to ask just by a show of hands, if you have heard of the term rape culture, please raise your hand. Okay. So I will just explain that really briefly. Rape culture is sort of an environment we've created in which hostility towards women, particularly in sexual regards, is not taken seriously. Rape jokes are a really common example of rape culture. It's a very negative, harmful, damaging concept, and it's very pervasive in our society today. Oh, boys will be boys saying to excuse bad behavior, that's rape culture. It's also actually not true. Boys will not be rapists. Boys will be boys, and rapists will be rapists. But it's so ingrained in us from everything, what we watch, conversations we have, media we consume. It's just part of who we are as a society. And that is what makes the work that we're doing, trying to get everyone to take violence against women seriously, what makes it a challenge. Over and over, I read about women who stayed silent because they weighed their option, and staying silent was the best one. Coming forward involves opening up your life to harsh scrutiny, and many times you are re-victimized over and over. You might even be asked to reenact what you experienced that you felt was violating. I didn't say anything because he was my boss. I didn't say anything because I didn't want him to get in trouble. I didn't say anything because it was my fault. Or I didn't say anything because who would believe me? Despite this negativity, it became clear that the simple act of posting these two words opened up a door and tapped into something powerful. I've often thought that the Me Too movement was rightly timed, meaning that if it happened earlier in a different atmosphere, the reaction would not have been the same. The 2016 election cycle introduced the world to Donald Trump and his Access Hollywood tape. I apologize for the language I'm going to use. I thought there would be no way a man could publicly state that he liked to grab women by the pussy, indicating basically without their consent, and become president, but here we are. It's almost as if his election opened the floodgates and gave a stamp of approval to this type of behavior. Instead of women going silent in the wake of his election, which was a fear that many advocates had, that there was clear evidence that this man, who holds the most powerful position in the country, abuses women, but that didn't stop people from thinking he still deserved to become president. It didn't stifle people. I think people were so angry by what happened that it led to people speaking out, and I think it was the tipping point of the melting pot. In the following year, prior to the Me Too tweet, but after the election, Uber employee Susan Fowler published an essay detailing an extremely toxic workplace culture consisting of frequent sexual harassment and misconduct. The co-founder and CEO, Travis Kalanick, resigned and 20 other employees were fired. In April, the New York Times published an article detailing complaints of sexual harassment against Fox News anchor Bill O'Reilly. And it was after advertisers began to drop his show that Fox decided to let him go. But he still reportedly received a $25 million severance package. Think of the facts of that. A man who was fired for sexually harassing women still was given a $25,000 bonus, basically, after his behavior was acknowledged by everyone who, participated in that agreement. And his accusers were vilified for trying to ruin his life, and one could argue that he is now retired with $25 million and perhaps his life has improved. On October 5th, the New York Times published an article detailing accusations of sexual harassment against Harvey Weinstein. And this had been a big secret in Hollywood for decades. And once that story came out, a few days later, the New Yorker published an article including over another dozen accusations. And the Weinstein trial is currently playing out, but that unearthed really just disturbing pattern of behavior and enabling. As Me Too exploded worldwide, we were dealing with our own reckoning here in Santa Clara County. Many of you have probably heard the name Brock Turner. Brock Turner is a former Stanford student who was charged with 3 felony counts relating to the sexual assault of an unconscious woman on the Stanford campus. He was found guilty in a court of law, but the presiding judge, Aaron Persky, voiced concern about Turner's future prospects if he were to be jailed, choosing to impose a 6-month sentence. The maximum was 14 years, and the prosecutors were asking for 6. And the way the jail system works, Turner only served 3 months. And this is for 3 felony counts of sexual assault. So just imagine sitting in that courtroom, hearing a judge debate what punishment would be best for the perpetrator and the perpetrator's best future. Turns out that former Judge Persky did that a lot. Stanford Law professor and my personal friend and hero, Michelle Dauber, who couldn't be here today, examined Persky's record and went through thousands of pages of court transcripts. And it turned out that there was a clear pattern of bias, and Persky had a history of handing down lenient sentences to privileged perpetrators in cases involving violence against women, basically. Professor Dauber collected signatures and filed the notice of intent to recall with the Santa Clara County Register of Voters in June 2017. I served as one of the co-chairs for the campaign, and we learned a lot over the course of the following year. It was clear we had support both for our campaign and the larger issues it represented. With a small core group and dozens of hardworking, dedicated volunteers, we gathered over 95,000 signatures to ensure the recall ended up on the June 2018 ballot. We secured endorsements from leaders from all different sectors. We canvassed neighborhoods. We wrote postcards. We went to farmers markets. We showed up at local clubs. We did everything we could to interact with voters because we felt if people knew what we were fighting for and why, we would earn their support. And it turns out we were right. We won. 60, yes, let's take a minute for that. We won. That was not enough. 61.6% of voters voted yes to recalling Aaron Tursky as a Superior Court judge. Winning an election on our behalf by over 23 points is no common feat, but what it did emphasize is that there are people out there who support these issues, and one way that they're showing their support and using their voice is at the ballot box. What became clear was that we had to seize on the momentum started by the recall and the Me Too movement. So we met to debrief, discuss successes, and plan our next move. Over the next few months, we started to form the Enough is Enough voter project, which is what I'm really excited to talk to you about today. The Enough is Enough voter project is committed to making violence against women a voting issue. As a result of the Me Too movement, survivors are speaking out against harassment and violence. All across America, predators are finally being held accountable. They are losing their jobs, and they are being investigated and subsequently prosecuted in court. Elected officials, however, seem immune from this process of reckoning. As an organization, we conduct research, provide public information, and oppose politicians who have a poor track record on our issues. So that would be officials who don't support extending protections to rape victims, who vote to defund programs that support victims of domestic violence. Our goal is to hold politicians accountable and ensure that violence against women is a part of the national conversation next November 2020 and in future elections after that. Defeating these candidates will send a powerful message to Washington that we, the voters, will no longer tolerate sexual harassment and violence against women, and that we will stand behind survivors. I want to talk briefly about some of the work that we've already done as an organization, and I will end with where we hope to go from here. Last fall, when we met, we researched candidates holding or running for state level office nationwide. We selected 5 candidates whose races we believed we could positively affect. Jason Lewis is a United States Congressman from Minnesota's 2nd District, and he was defeated. He was nicknamed Mini Trump, and he had a long history of making misogynistic and demeaning statements about women, including "don't look like some slut," and "you won't get hit on." Women voters are without a brain, questioned their humanity, and said that women don't understand finances. So, and that's why women didn't have the right to vote for a full century. These were things we felt that his constituents might be interested to know. So we ran a postcard campaign and gave information, just disseminated information that's out there, that's proven, that's true, and said, you know, this person has said these things, it's up to you whether you want to continue to give him your support. So Jason Lewis lost his race. Matt Rinaldi is a Texas state representative. He was targeted because he had the worst voting record when it came to voting bills around sexual assault. He called the Me Too movement a crazy, opportunistic political attack. He also voted to limit the statute of limitations for rape victims, as opposed to extending. And I think as we're all learning, women don't come forward, victims don't come forward right away, and there are many, many reasons behind that. So reducing the time in which they have a voice is just a really aggressive way to silence them. Matt Manmiller was a Washington State representative. He was accused by over 20 students for acting inappropriately towards him. He lost his tenure. For those of you in academia, you know it's very, very hard to lose your tenure, but he did based on these allegations. He did not resign while he was running, but he contacted our organization and said that he would be stepping down and not assuming office, and that it had already been worked out with the local Republican Party. So we count that as a win because it's the pressure from us. I think that gave the Republicans actually the leverage that they needed. Devin Mathis is a California state representative who had a history of making comments while basically being a drunken bully in the workplace. Unfortunately, he is in a very strong Trump country, and he has Trump's direct support. Other Republicans have actually called on him to resign because they believe what he did was bad enough, but he has not. And then our special case that I'd like to end on is David Byrd, who is a state legislator from Tennessee who's credibly accused of molesting high school children. He was their coach. They were 15 and 16 years old. One of them actually confronted him on a phone call that was taped, and he admits to what has gone on. So he does not discuss it, he doesn't deny it. There's support for him within his party, but we were able to support Enough is Enough Tennessee, our local chapter, and they have lobbied Byrd to take an early retirement, and he will not be running again next year. So that, yes, those women went down every day. Some of his victims were there. They were on the ground doing the work, just, being there, speaking their truth and saying, like, this is who this man is, and he needs to be held accountable for his actions. Violence against women is an important issue. It will never get better if we can't talk about it, and that involves reducing the stigma, protecting survivors, and holding perpetrators accountable. And when one of the biggest pushbacks I get when I say holding them accountable is, oh, you want to ruin their life. No, that's not true. I think what we've seen over the past 2 years is that when a victim comes forward, they are the ones who are much more at risk than the people they're accusing. If you look at Brett Kavanaugh, he ended up on the Supreme Court, and Dr. Ford is still receiving death threats. So I think when we say accountable, it means you shouldn't be in positions of power. How can you be a legislator voting on these issues when you yourself have a history of participating? Why are you going to vote for protections for rape victims when you have sexually harassed or violated a woman? So that's what our goal is, to keep the conversation going. I don't think it can be stopped at this point. and I hope we don't want it to. We're not trying to hold elected officials up to a higher standard. I'd like to hold them to at least a standard. You know, there are many legislators who could not become teachers. And I think that says a lot about who we have in office. But I'll end with that there's something we can do about it. We've already started doing it. It's been successful. Please check out the website, and we're starting to plan out for next year, so there is plenty of work to be done.
Any questions for people?
Thank you so much. I was so excited to hear you, actually. I think my question is more like, why is there this hostility against victims in general? Like when you say Dr. Ford receives death threats, why do you think, I mean, I would understand not believing someone, you know, for example, I would understand being skeptical, but more and more we hear of this sort of hostility. And why do you think that is? I mean, on a social and human level, why do you think people react to victims in such way?
I think that's a great question, and that I have a very long answer for it, so I'm trying to condense it. But I'm going to go back to some terms I used earlier and add in a few more. I think at the beginning when I was talking about rape culture, like victim blaming is part of rape culture. And it's almost a formula in a conversation, you know, so-and-so reports an assault. Okay, well then they go through, what was she drinking? What was she wearing? Let's go through all the things that she could have possibly done wrong, and then maybe we'll look at whether the perpetrator could have had motives. In the situation with Dr. Ford, she came forth and people said, you know, you're trying to ruin his life. No, she wasn't. She wasn't trying to put him in jail. She wasn't trying to get him blacklisted from every, you know, his favorite restaurant in town. She was saying, you know, you sexually assaulted me and you should not hold one of the most powerful positions in the country. And everyone kept saying, you're ruining his life, you're ruining his life. Well, at the end of the day, he's sitting on the Supreme Court, and that allegation hasn't really seemed to hurt him. I think it made women angry because, again, we're being told either what you're saying is not valid or what you're saying is not important. We really need to, it's untangling this big ball of yarn, because the idea is that you are accusing someone of rape when you identify your attacker. And that is somehow seen as a bad thing. And we really need to change that. Like if you were carjacked or had your purse stolen and you said, that's the thief, you know, people would think, okay, she identified the thief. Now we can go through the process of accountability. Not, she identified the thief, let's have him explain why he stole, right? So we really need to change the dynamics of how we look at everything, like naming your attacker is a more positive way of reframing it. Like, I don't think we need to get rid of, the clinical way to say it, but if changing language makes it an easier conversation to have, I think that's something that we can all practice. I know that I change the way I talk about this work with different audiences. So I think, it really is this big ball of yarn, but when you're accusing someone, it doesn't necessarily mean you're trying to ruin their life. There's all this societal junk that's attached, like a woman would do it to lie because she's manipulative. I don't think I'm answering your question because it's so convoluted, but basically I think we need to change the way we look at victims and victimhood and think of people who come forward as strong and brave. And there are always people, like no accuser or perpetrator I've ever met has been totally abandoned. They will always have people behind them supporting them, and victims need people to support them through their process.
Thank you very much. We're done with our speaker series, and next is our interview. So we'll take a few minutes to get ready.